Morning. Welcome to the 2019 Women Leaders in Cybersecurity Conference. I'm Judy Germano, and I've had the honor of chairing this conference for the last 4 years at NYU. And one of the questions I had this year was, is it okay to still do a women's conference? Because as we are in a time of gender fluidity and making sure that people can, as we always should be accepting all genders and all people, is it okay that it's women-focused? And when you look at the statistics in the field of cybersecurity, it is unfortunately still a need to focus on how do we make sure that women are in positions of leadership in the cybersecurity field, as well as other fields, and also on speaking panels. I continue to go to a number of events where it's primarily men and the same people keep appearing. And one of the benefits that's come out of this conference over the last few years, in addition to the fact that it's incredibly fun and wonderful to bring together leading women doing amazing things in cybersecurity from all different aspects of government and industry and academia, to talk about important substantive issues. And it's an opportunity for all of us to meet each other and connect or reconnect, and we realize the world is small, but it's getting bigger, and there are a lot of really amazing women. So a benefit of this conference has been, I've gotten calls over the year where people say, listen, I'm putting together something, I have all men speakers, there just aren't women in cybersecurity, but you do that thing at NYU, can you help me? And I say, yes, look at the agendas for the last 4 years. There are amazing women doing amazing things in great positions in our field. Start with those agendas. And the problem that's happened, as I've noticed, is it just the same people. If you think quick of who are the leaders, there are so many men that those are the people who then automatically get picked. And I tell people, you just have to dig a little further. You can't just accept no diversity on your event or in your organization. So maybe you have to take 2 extra steps to make sure that you're adding the necessary diversity of opinions and backgrounds and gender and ethnicities and viewpoints to make a more enriching, more effective organizational team to address cybersecurity, our nation's most critical issues from an economic perspective, as well as from a national security perspective. So we need to get it right, and that requires a diverse opinion. And the other thing that's happened is people have said, well, I'd love to hire more women, but there just aren't any women in the field. And again, you say, yes, there are. You just need to look a little bit harder. And our honoree today, who's receiving the Women Cybersecurity Leaders Award, is Joyce Bercaglia, who has done a tremendous work over the years of bringing together thousands of women in the cybersecurity field, and also of helping place many women in information security and technology positions. So again, it may require those who are hiring to just take an extra step, or those who are planning events to take an extra look at who else is there other than the usual candidates, to make sure that they are bringing the necessary and right diversity. And our purpose for the conference is just show there are many amazing women. Here we are. Great to have you here today. Wonderful speakers on our agenda, which I'm honored to have. I was going to talk more, but we have already, we need to start. So I think that I'm going to leave it with that and just say thank you all. I must thank Sarvanaz and Alex, who you've met in the front. They've done an amazing job logistically to make this all happen. And also to thank Craig Newmark and the Hewlett Foundation for their financial support to help make this event possible this year and hopefully for many years to come. So thank you. I'm going to turn right into our first panel on the Beyond Politics. We're going to look at election security and other critical infrastructure. There are 16 categories of critical infrastructure that have been identified, election security being one of them. It's a nonpartisan issue. I don't care what political affiliation you may have, we all have to worry about security and security of our elections. And it's something that's been brewing for years, and now it's getting more attention, but people need to know, what do we do about it? And the panelists who are coming up have worked and are working in this area to help address these problems and have some great input, not just on election security, but also the other aspects of of our critical infrastructure in terms of our financial systems, our public utilities, and other areas that are incredibly important. I'll introduce the moderator, and then we'll bring up the panelists. But Zainab Ahmed is a partner at Gibson, Dunn & Crutcher, major law firm. She also has been a federal prosecutor, was most recently the Senior Assistant Special Counsel for Special Counsel Robert Mueller's office in the investigation. And as an Assistant U.S. Attorney in both D.C. and New York, Zainab was the Deputy Chief of the National Security and Cybercrime Section in New York, so has worked on some very critical cybercrime cases, and also was involved in the World Economic Forum's conference on public-private information sharing, which is another area that I believe our panel will discuss and we'll be covering later today as well. So with that, I welcome you, thank you for coming, and I'll introduce the first panel.
Thank you so much, Judy, for that introduction. As Judy highlighted, I think the topic that we're going to be starting with is of universally recognized importance. I also think it has far more depth and texture than people tend to associate with it in terms of election security and critical infrastructure. It is both multi-jurisdictional and multidisciplinary, and we've done our best to pull together a panel that can speak to all of the various aspects of the issue. I will introduce them briefly, and then they can, of course, introduce themselves further when they talk, but Michelle Amico works at IBM and works in consulting in this area. She's done a lot of relevant and fascinating consulting with state and local governments and with hospitals and the like, and she'll be able to talk about when you think of the huge list of issues that are in critical infrastructure space, I think she can speak very well about how it's broader than I think it is typically understood to be, and some of the problems that companies are facing in that regard. We're honored to have with us the Honorable Secretary of State Tanisha Wei from New Jersey. She is sort of on the front lines of this issue when you think of it from an election security perspective, and will be able to tell us how states are dealing with the issue and whom they're interacting with in order to handle it. And then we have Deputy Assistant Director Tanya Ugoretz from the FBI. She has an extremely broad mandate, but cyber readiness is a critical part of it, and she'll be able to talk us through the general threat landscape, what law enforcement is doing about it, what the intelligence community is doing about it. And we have Valentina Soria, who has a background in intelligence and right now works at a major financial institution dealing with the intelligence threats facing the financial sector more broadly, and in that role interacts with people who have all the various different jobs that our panelists have to figure out the best sort of public-private collaborative approach dealing with this issue. So I thought maybe we could start by having Deputy Ugoretz give us just the general threat landscape as the FBI views it, and then go from there.
Sure, thank you very much. So the threats to critical infrastructure are diverse, and they come from a range of actors, which I think makes them especially challenging to counter. But it's much like many of the cyber threats we're currently facing. I think when we talk about threats to critical infrastructure, we often think of major nation states like Russia, China, Iran, states that are highly capable of conducting sophisticated cyber activity. And we've seen actual instances of some of those states, namely Russia and Iran, conducting disruptive and destructive attacks against critical infrastructure overseas, typically in their own regional areas. For example, Russia attacking the energy sector in Ukraine twice, at least twice, a few years ago, as well as suspected Iranian activity against Saudi Arabia. So we know these types of adversaries are capable if they have the intent to do these types of activities. And we often look at what nation states are doing in their own neighborhoods first to try to get some hints about how they might target the United States if they were to choose to do so. But it's not just about nation states. We also have cyber criminals who are not necessarily motivated to destroy things, but to make a profit for the most part. So if you've paid attention to the news over the past year, you've probably heard a lot about ransomware, which is a means of using malicious software to essentially lock up a computer or computer network and hold it for ransom until you pay an amount to get your files back. With critical infrastructure being increasingly connected to the internet, there is the risk of that type of profit-motivated activity. And we've increasingly seen that the types of criminals who conduct ransomware attacks are targeting the types of victims that have the highest incentive to pay, which only makes sense. So when we speak of critical infrastructure, that could be hospitals, that could be municipalities who offer critical services, et cetera. And then at the FBI, we also worry about the insider threat. Persons who are within your organizations who may be motivated for whatever reason to cause harm. And so particularly if you're an organization that owns or operates critical infrastructure, there's certainly a high imperative to have a strong insider threat program to be able to detect that type of activity.
Interesting. And Valentina, can you talk us through a little bit of what you're seeing in answer to the same question of the threat landscape, but from the private sector side?
Yeah, sure. Does it work? Can you hear me okay? Okay. So as Estonia said, pretty much the same. The threat landscape for an organization like us, I work in Morgan Stanley.
Here, why don't you use this?
Yes.
We'll figure it out.
Thank you. Probably better. I work in Morgan Stanley, so obviously a leading financial sector organization in the country and overseas. And for us, the threat landscape is extremely busy, I would say, and extremely varied as well. To back up what Tonya said, when we look at the sort of, the sophistication of threat actors targeting an organization like us, is pretty much the full spectrum of threats that you can think about. Yes, of course, financially motivated actors. Even more so, more problematic for us when you combine financially motivated actors who have nation-state capabilities. One of those that we haven't necessarily mentioned, North Korea, for example, that have been associated, nation-state actors that have been more recently associated with financially motivated attacks against payment systems. That is a kind of sophistication that really concerns us on a daily basis. As well as, of course, the most opportunistic actors out there. So it's pretty much, the whole variety, I would say. For us, it's also increasingly an area of concern when it comes to when we talk about third parties and supply chain attacks, especially in the environment where we are today, increasingly connected, and of course with all the interdependencies across sectors, but also again, increasing reliance on third-party vendors for all sorts of services. Think of an organization like us that have thousands and thousands of vendors that we rely on. The third-party component of the risk, your risk exposure, risk surface, is expanding by the day. So, and there's only so much you can do, of course, about it, because you can defend your network as well as you want, but that kind of weakness farther down the chain is something that you can prepare for most of the time. But what is important when it comes to this kind of threats and risks is not only the fact that you have to, of course, to try and defend your organization and prepare, but most importantly prepare for that. So along with the sort of defense aspect of the cybersecurity, when we talk about cybersecurity today, is yes, about defending your network and your assets, but also preparing and your resiliency, be resilient for what it's about to come. It's only a matter of if when, not if. We know that today. So that's why even for an increasingly regulated sector like the financial industry, regulators are increasingly pushing to on the point of operational resiliency today.
Michelle, could you maybe give us some examples of what we're hearing them talk about in terms of threat landscapes that you've actually seen play out in your work?
Definitely. So, my group's goal a lot of times, as Valentina said, we're one of the thousands of vendors that are helping organizations like Morgan Stanley, and I particularly cover state and local government. So, for example, since we're on, our topic is about elections, I cover a large city in the U.S., and for example, their a Board of Elections database where voter registration is, we can check our voter data, change it, everything like that. During the 12 days that you can, absentee vote or vote in this state, there's constant DDoS attacks on that exact website. Constantly, and if some of you don't know, distributed denial of service attack, which is not very common anymore, but this is just another organization and usually a foreign actor that's trying to get into our data, and that's something that obviously we help remediate and we provide the services for that. But we're seeing almost every day our incident response team is responding to different cities and states of ransomware attacks. You see, whether it's the state of Louisiana or the Labour Party in the UK last week was attacked. I don't know if you guys heard about this, but there's a ransomware attack with their database. So, there's so many examples every day, and that's kind of why we all have jobs, I guess.
And so when you talk about DDoS attacks, obviously DOS stands for denial of service, and the purpose of that attack, I would imagine, is to make the website, in this case you said the Board of Elections, inaccessible to people who want to access it. And what's the relevant time period that they're focused on? So who would be accessing that website, and what is the time period that it seems like these actors are trying to prohibit that activity from occurring?
Right. So, for example, I would go onto this website to see where my local polling place is. And if you can't go on, again, the whole point is to kind of knock down or slow down this website. If you can't access that, a lot of times you don't know where your polling website. I moved last year, so my polling place changed even though I only moved a block away. So I actually went into that same website, or you would go into that website and see where things are. So that's kind of
And so, Secretary Wei, is this something that states are seeing and are concerned about when it comes to attempts to inhibit voters from actually just figuring out where to go and vote and then actually voting?
Okay, can everyone hear me? Okay, first I just want to thank NYU for hosting this very most important panel discussion, especially for our women in this space. I just want to also start off by saying, in terms of elections, I can speak for New Jersey. It's become a mission that we remain vigilant, proactive, and of course, and I really want to underscore this, election cybersecurity effort that is indeed a partnership across all levels of government and third-party entities, even including our vendors in this respect. Now, what we have done in New Jersey, especially in terms of our voter registration systems, we want to make certain, and I can't disclose everything because we want to make sure everything remains secure publicly, but we do have secure logins. We utilize the two-step or multi-factor authentications to ensure that there is some security in terms of our systems. There's the firewall. We also have various partnerships on the federal level. The FBI we partner with to help us in terms of our cybersecurity efforts, and U.S. Homeland Security, our state's Homeland Security, and we've even engaged, I want to say, CISA the cybersecurity agency within Homeland. And weekly scans are performed on our systems through Homeland and CISA to ensure that there aren't any malicious, nefarious actors that are in play. Again, the key is to remain proactive. We just hosted our general election this past November, and thankfully, knocking on some wood, there wasn't any foreign or even domestic interference in our system, changing the votes and the like. And one other thing that I would want to note about the New Jersey election space is that our elections are really conducted on the local level. So again, partnerships. We have a cybersecurity expert team from Homeland who's been dedicated to my Department of State, who goes to the counties and does the risk assessments of their systems and develops the best practices, looks to patch any network gaps and the like on their systems to somehow safeguard and be on, how can I say this, aggressive, if you will, and robust in defending any sort of actors.
And Tanya, can you tell us a little bit about what the FBI is seeing in terms of the types of attacks on voting infrastructure or election infrastructure?
Sure. So I'd like to say at the outset that to our knowledge, and our knowledge is informed by the intelligence community as private sector and the FBI, we have not seen any foreign governments attempt to tamper with vote counts in any election. As you heard the Secretary allude to, there's a lot of agencies that are involved in this effort to secure elections. And I just read a quote this morning from the head of the Election Assistance Commission who said we are light years as a government, as a society from where we were in 2016 when we were just starting to grapple with this problem. And I think that's right. FBI and DHS through the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA, are really domestically kind of on the front lines of that. DHS through their interactions with the states, FBI collecting intelligence as the lead domestic intelligence agency, collecting information on threats, taking what we see from our intelligence community partners and trying to downgrade that as quickly as possible to a form that we can share indicators out to the people who are in charge of trying to defend networks. And that's really the goal, is how quickly can we take the intelligence that we're seeing about threats as they're forming and get them out to the people who can take action on them as quickly as possible. But FBI and DHS are backed up by a whole alphabet soup of agencies, which is good. And those that you might think of typically, like CIA and NSA, who primarily work overseas, collecting foreign intelligence. But when we're thinking about how foreign states might try to influence our elections, it's the intelligence they can collect overseas that informs us then in how we can support the states in defending their networks. So I would say election security is probably the most collaborative effort I've seen in my almost 20 years of federal government, because there's a real recognition of just how high the stakes are in protecting our, the core of our democratic institutions. And threats to the elections, as we learned quickly in 2016, they cross a lot of traditional boundaries in how the federal government looks at things, even in the intelligence community, in terms of how we look at specific nation states, how we look at criminal threats versus national security threats, what agencies do overseas and domestically. After 2016, we all realized we had to very quickly find a way to work across all of those traditional stovepipes. And this is where the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, ODNI, has done quite a lot of work in being that kind of neutral convening space that brings all the federal agencies together to see what do we need to do differently, better, faster, to support the states in their efforts.
And Zainab, if I can, because Tanya has brought up an excellent point, and I truly applaud the federal entities in bringing together we secretaries of state on a national level, because we get classified and unclassified briefings by them, which is, of course, of paramount importance. The DHS has actually conducted two, I want to say, annual tabletop exercises. They're called TTX, virtual exercises for every state to participate in. So again, I say that the federal government, the alphabet soup of all of them, because I can't even remember. I know they're backed up by the EISAC, which is another third-party intelligence security center, which has like a virtual, if you will, map which can reflect all of the potential threats globally that are occurring and trying to attack our systems. I would also want to note, I know in New Jersey, we have modeled the New Jersey KIC, which is a cybersecurity center, which has already this year blocked, I want to say, 680 million emails for our staff. And there's been a blocking of about 100 million attacks on our systems. So with those initiatives in place, they've done good, well, I should say, to defend. I'm sorry, just wanted to.
No, I think it's very helpful and encouraging to understand the depth and extent of the federal-state collaboration here, particularly because elections are managed at the local level. And I don't use that as the equivalent of state in this context, because my understanding is that even within states, it's the local municipalities that have the responsibility in this area. But I wonder, Valentina, if you can also help us understand whether that same degree of information and intelligence sharing is going on between the public and private sector, whether as it pertains to either elections or other aspects of critical infrastructure, and whether you think that that is also moving in a positive direction, or whether there are improvements that could be made in that type of collaboration.
I will still. Sonia's microphone. It is obviously we have great partnership and information sharing within the sector. We have obviously our own ISAC, the Information Sharing and Analysis Center, as many other critical infrastructure industries, of course, sectors have their own, and that is an immensely valuable force multiplier for every organization in the industry. Through that and through other initiatives like for the FSARC as well, which is a sort of a similar organization for systemically important financial institutions here in the U.S. We have also established increasingly valuable relationship with the government and with government agencies and obviously law enforcement organizations as well. It's really primarily through those institutions that we get most of the information that we gather from the government and government partners. There are also, again, there is definitely been an improvement in the partnership with the public sector over the years. I can only remember, years ago when I really started in this field, there was so much of a, silo. There was so many silos between, the public and private sector, and where we are today, if anything, is, hugely encouraging that we're definitely moving in the right direction. Are we there yet? No. I think as normal for everything, we can always get better. I think there's been a genuine improvement, especially at the federal government level, obviously with the establishment of CISA. In the last year, the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency within DHS, we've seen incredibly or increasingly rather information sharing across the for the public in general, which obviously comes to us as well. What I would say is that where we need to see some improvement is in the speed of that kind of information sharing. So sometimes talking as a practitioner in the field, what we need, we definitely don't don't have an issue with like lack of information or lack of technical data that we can see every day. I have two of my analysts here today who can definitely attest to that there is way too much information of that we have to deal with every day. So it's not necessarily the availability of information, it's the quality of the information that we can get. And often we lack context, and so where we really see the value of a private-public partnership is really government agencies trying to help us with making sense of what we see. And sometimes that is not always the case, or at least sometimes it comes too late when that information is no longer actionable from us. Like from talking as an intelligence professional, we need to have the information that is actionable today for my organization, right? So I think that there is still room for improvement in that sense, but I could definitely tell, and again, also the partnership between agencies like NSA, DHS is different from the partnership that we have with the FBI and other law enforcement agencies. I think in some cases we see also the quality of the information that is different, and sometimes with law enforcement we see they actually understand the value of getting something, even if it's not 100% accurate, that they can kind of say, we can corroborate 100% what it is, but it's actionable in a way that we can use it and say, do with it what you see fit, and let us know, if there's something else that we can do to help you. And that is actually preferable to waiting to the 2 months to get something out. At that point, there isn't really much that I can do with that. So
I see. So just to push on that for a moment, what are the reasons that the intelligence you sometimes get is not actionable? Is it that by the time you get it, it's stale? Is it the level of detail or quality? Is it the fact that you don't have the context for it? Like, what are some of the issues with the type and nature and timeliness of the information you're getting that are leading to that?
There is definitely a timeliness issue, and I obviously understand the challenges, having worked also in the government, on the government side. I know the challenges that they have. They have to go through a lot of hops before they can actually release that information, and obviously there's only so much that they can disclose to make sure that they protect their sources and the like. So I'm totally sympathetic about the challenges that they have to go through, and again the effort that they're trying to make to do that. But again, by the time that they've gone through all those hops, there isn't really, maybe the threat is already gone, or maybe my organization, touching on wood, has already been hit, and so that information becomes stale, as you said, right? So in some cases you have to differentiate between, if you're getting information that is about, an attack or something that can help you understand the context of that kind of attack, still useful. If it's something that and so even if it comes a few months later, it can help you understand the context around maybe nation state activity, and that is, it's more at the strategic level. When we're talking about tactical information that again I need to act on today, if it comes out in a week, again that's really the sort of, it's missing the the momentum or the point of doing that.
And so I think within the private sector, the financial industry is generally recognized to sort of be at the vanguard of cybersecurity issues, both for many reasons. They're highly regulated, and so they had to be. They're also incentivized because they have the most readily monetizable information out there, and that is part of the reason that they have been a target of hackers and the like for a very long period of time. But I wonder, when it comes to other industries that handle critical infrastructure that have not had reason to sort of be as aggressive about these issues for as long a period of time as the financial industry, what sort of issues they confront. And I wondered, Michelle, since you've worked a lot in the healthcare space, if you could talk about any vulnerabilities that you see there, or what you think the issues are in that space, and how companies, hospitals, like in that space, could maybe improve.
Definitely. And like you said, it's so true. I mean, financial institutions have really been, I think, where everyone else is, the rest of the industries are trying to model their cybersecurity infrastructure after. And covering healthcare and government, I've definitely seen, that progress in the healthcare space, but that's where now threats are coming in more because of, like you said, critical infrastructure. So I would say a large part of, healthcare data is just overall wanted because it's personal and you can use it in most lucrative ways besides just getting money. I think the newest, wave of threats is with IoT. So whether it's devices or heart pacemakers, things like that, we're seeing that they're not necessarily secured from right off the bat, and that they're any of the infrastructure around it can be wiped out and hurt people physically. We're also seeing if a ransomware attack happened in a hospital. I mean, there was a hospital in Wyoming that got wiped by a ransomware attack, I think, last year, and they were unable to, access patient data for a few hours, and that, that's everything in a hospital now is running off of whether it's Epic or Cerner, or patient data record databases, and that's how you're able to cure a patient. So there's always a threat there for sure.
So Tanya, if a hospital called the FBI and said we are the victim of a ransomware attack, we can't access our patient data, we're afraid that our operating equipment is going to go down, how would the FBI advise them to deal with that?
So that the initial response would be led by the FBI field office. Every field office has a cyber squad with agents, analysts, computer scientists, you name it, who are equipped to kind of respond rapidly to a victim in that case. We'd also be coordinating right away with DHS. So the way that incident response works in the cyber realm is that we have some kind of shared responsibilities in terms of how we approach it, with the FBI being the lead for responding to the threat, helping to respond right away, collect evidence, try to stop whatever the activity is that's occurring, and then DHS being responsible for asset response, which is helping to assess risk, helping to mitigate the attack as soon as possible. With ransomware in particular, it's tricky because there's that debate over whether the victim of an attack, when they're in the midst of it, should pay the ransom. And that's a very hard question for an organization to have to grapple with when they're in the midst of that type of attack. From the FBI and the federal government's perspective, we do not recommend paying ransom for much of the same reason that we would not recommend doing so if someone were physically taken hostage, just like your files are being taken hostage in a ransomware attack. It promotes criminal activity. You don't know where the money's going. You have no guarantee that you're dealing with an ethical criminal who will actually give you your files back. Although I will say that cyber criminals do pride themselves on having a good reputation for being ethical, because it's a business. And so if it would come to be known that they do not, honor payments or things like that, then they'd be out of business pretty soon. But regardless, so there are many reasons not to pay the ransom, but that's really an important discussion for organizations to have before they are in the throes of an attack like this, because there's a lot of pressure when an organization is in the midst of it. And then from a larger perspective, with a ransomware in particular, the FBI has really adapted, and that was because of one case in particular that affected the state of New Jersey and others, which was a strain of ransomware called SamSam. It affected victims in all 50 states around the world. And when you have something like that, it's very different from kind of your traditional types of threats where you can just respond in one place and lead an investigation and collect intelligence in one particular physical area. So now when we have, whether it's a major nation-state threat or a major strain of ransomware that's affecting a lot of victims, we centralize the efforts against that in one field office. We have the benefit with the FBI of having the largest, I think, domestic presence of any federal agency with 56 field offices, hundreds of sub-offices, so that the relevant office can respond immediately to a victim, no matter where the victim is. And oftentimes those offices already have pre-established relationships with those organizations, collect evidence, collect intelligence, feed that up into the one central field office that is the expert on SamSam ransomware or Russian cyber actors, and then all of the efforts to counter that activity, to find who's responsible, and to impose consequences, whether that's indictments, sanctions, other things, are all led centrally then. And so ransomware and cyber threats have kind of, led us to evolve from, your very kind of traditional distributed model of intelligence gathering and investigation to how do we make sure we centralize all that so that we're most effective.
And so shifting the focus back for a moment to election security itself, Secretary Wei, I was hoping that you could help us understand how we got where Tanya said we are now, which is light years from where we were in 2016. What exactly happened between 2016 and now at the state level that has helped improve the situation?
Okay, well, of course, in January, I believe in 2017, in a response to the 2016 presidential elections, that's when then former Secretary of Homeland Security included elections as part of critical infrastructure. So that was the start. And I can honestly say that I came aboard in 2018, and it was an awakening to the position of serving as the state's chief election official. And so also in response to all of this, just last year, we had received the federal HAVA dollars, the Help America Vote dollars. New Jersey received about 10 million, and the bulk of that went to, and I know that my colleagues throughout the nation also have dedicated their funding towards the cybersecurity efforts, making sure that the systems are safeguarded. There's Albert sensors. I know in New Jersey we have all of our counties. I applaud that effort. Not all of our counties, the state has Albert sensors on the networks, and the counties are now rolling those out. I also want to say that a bulk of the cybersecurity dollars, some of that went to our own nation, national, statewide, if you want to say TTX, that we conducted in September. We had about 14 out-of-state delegations, our federal partners, who participated, along with about over 400 of those who engaged in election exercises, election day exercises, hypotheticals, and then post-election exercises, because we can sit here and we can talk about all of the possible scenarios. We could wait for those possible scenarios to come into place, but what we really need to do, and we understand, is it's a groundwork sort of team effort in all of this on the ground. So we wanted to have all of our local election officials and their IT folk become part of this exercise and participate and go through the security drills. Like if you realize that there are an over amount of registrants in your SVRS system, that should send a flag, a question mark to the Board of Elections, the superintendents of elections, that maybe something is going afoul in their SVRS system, the state's SVRS system. So they need to, of course, make sure that everything is up to task with that. And again, it's it's been more of, again, the partnership. There's so much here. On a national level, there's the Government Coordinating Council, which brings together national secretaries of state, election top officials in the state, DHS, and others who can somewhat develop the best practices and, of course, exchange the information that's so very much needed. One of my colleagues from Minnesota, he had said that this election cybersecurity thing is a race without a finish line. And it really is, because our work is never going to be done, but we have to make certain that we are coordinated and that we are always aware proactively of any and all threats. And I have to say, in terms of elections, some may not even see this really as a threat or a major form of cyber security, but what is happening is that chaos, disruption is being thrown. More than anything in our elections, we witnessed it at our November election just last month, in which you have the social media misinformation or disinformation. You witness it even in text, with famous celebrities actually texting voters to go to a different polling location. So what we have done in New Jersey is, of course, rolled out a voter-verified mobile app, which is secure too, cyber-wise from attacks, to ensure that this information is going to the voters that's correct and accurate.
And just to add to that, I mean, if we look back, and I think I commend New Jersey for doing, I think you guys have been pretty ahead of the game in terms of like preparedness for this. But if we look back in 2016, it wasn't a cyber attack. It was a social engineering attack that, you know, may or may not have manipulated the election. And it's interesting how that has even triggered all of this, I guess, proactive and, you know, all of these precautions, and hopefully, you know, that will keep us in this, you know, credible voting, I guess, voter mindset. But at the end of the day, all of our elections it's a decentralized system. So it's very much on like the state and low or the very small level, and that's where I think the attack can happen. It's not necessarily going to be, oh, Russia's going to attack the 2020 election and make Trump win. It's going to be, you know, a small race in Trenton that can actually be happening and manipulated in terms of a cyber attack vector. If that makes sense.
And I'm thankful you brought that up, Michelle, because again, that's why we really are focusing on not only the state level, but we all know that the networks are like tentacles throughout the state and even in the counties, all different county departments. And then when you go to the municipal level, you have the county networks hooked up to one another. So again, with our locals, what we have pushed out is a continuity of operations plan called the COOP, in which they do have the emergency preparedness for their locals that notes what ifs, it notes best practices, it notes a list of what should we be doing and who should we immediately contact. And they too are part of the NJ KIC, to my understanding. So the KIC actually will coordinate with them and advise, share the necessary information. And I want to also say that in terms of the EIISAC, the Information Sharing Center up in Albany for elections, I'm proud to report that all of our counties are actually part of that. So they too get any and all threat information that is out there, because we can't underscore more, and thank you, Michelle, for mentioning this. We have to ensure the local election space and that they actually are armed too with the understanding and the tools, the resources, and the personnel. That's why we have our cyber experts too, who work hand in hand with them.
And if I could just add on to that quickly, if you don't mind, just to echo the points made, it's really, you're absolutely correct. It's not just about cyber. The way the FBI is approaching it is really looking across all of the disciplines that we collect intelligence on and investigate, and seeing how those apply to election-related threats. So, for example, we're looking not only at potential cyber attacks or intrusions against election infrastructure or campaigns or political organizations, but also foreign influence operations, as was mentioned, through our counterintelligence authorities, as well as kind of your more traditional election-related crimes like voter fraud and suppression. So we look at all of those individually, but also how those threats might be combined and come together like they did in 2016, where you had that social engineering and a cyber intrusion that was for the purposes of a foreign influence operation by hacking the information and then releasing it to the public. So one of our big changes since 2016 was instituting a foreign influence task force, which brings together representatives from our cyber, counterintelligence, and criminal divisions, as well as our intelligence personnel, all in one place, all working together, so we don't have that risk of not recognizing when a threat is forming in one of those areas and then might kind of morph into something else.
And I think that because the 2016 election that brought all of these issues to the forefront was a national presidential election, there is a tendency to assume that it is only that type of election that would draw the attention of hostile foreign actors or the like. But I'm wondering if you could speak to a little bit of what Michelle alluded to and tell us if you do see, from an intelligence perspective, that foreign state actors, other malicious criminal groups are at all focused on local elections, state elections. Where do you see them paying attention?
I agree that it's probably wise not to focus only on the national elections. Of course, that's what most galvanizes our attention, and it is in some ways the highest risk. But it is also important to look at those state and local elections. We know that there are foreign adversaries who are very active in trying to influence opinion among state and local government officials. I think we often think of that type of activity in DC or at the national level, trying to influence officials at that national level, but it happens too within our states. And so I would say over the past year or so, there's been a really concerted effort led by some senators on the Senate Intelligence Committee to bring together representatives of different federal agencies and go out to states or bring in representatives to the Capitol and brief them at a classified level on these are the types of influence efforts that you might be susceptible to or targeted with, and try to offer some information on how to recognize those.
Valentina, when it comes to the financial sector, are you seeing more activity by foreign state groups or by criminal groups? How does it break down for you in terms of the threats that are emanating into that area?
Well, if you talk about the wider financial sector, which I'm going to talk about, because rather than just our organization, it's as I said before, it's really across the spectrum. So obviously, being that for banks and financial sector organization, financially motivated actors are on top of our list, especially at times during Christmas and things like that, when criminals are busy trying to target all of us. For us, obviously, there is an increased level of vigilance that is normal, as it happens. But I think at the end of the day, we look and we see activity from also nation-state actors, and that is not necessarily related, as I mentioned before. There are that odd category of financially motivated actors that are also nation-state actors. But in other cases, there's also the element of targeted espionage activity and reconnaissance. And sometimes it's it's difficult to tell. We can see, and the sector may see activity that is just really reconnaissance or probing our networks. And you can necessarily tell if it's for the purpose of espionage or collections or information gathering activities, and that may be connected to economic objectives and national security objectives of those countries. So it might not even be the intended target, but maybe the indirect target for the actual goal of what it is that they want to achieve. In other cases, it's again probing critical infrastructure, like they're doing also with utilities, energy sector, and telecom. So the other aspect that I'm really keen that we continue to emphasize, because I think there's still a lot of work to do in this area, is understanding the critical interdependencies between sectors. So the cross-sector collaboration also is something that I think government should and can obviously encourage more and help enhance. I think at the level of understanding those criticalities and those critical interdependencies, we're still a bit, far, we're not there yet. I think one of the elements is that we don't understand enough of how, let's say, an attack against the energy sector could, cascade down to us. And at the ground level, yes, we understand that. But in actual terms, how would that manifest, and what are all the different kind of implications that kind of attack could have for financial sector organizations and the like? So obviously, tabletop exercises like the ones that DHS organizes every couple of years, Cyberstorm. We have Cyberstorm 2020 plan, which is really about testing, the resiliency of, energy, financial, and telecoms to a kind of attack that could have those wider implications, systemic implications. When we talk about systemic attacks or attacks that have systemic impact, it may not just be, again, what is directly targeted at my sector, but again, how what we see against other sector could cascade down. That is an area that I think we're still, a bit behind.
And to go back to the reconnaissance and espionage activity that you were alluding to, there's the obvious reconnaissance goal when it comes to critical infrastructure of identifying vulnerabilities in order to exploit them at a later point in time. But putting that aside, when you're seeing espionage activity in the networks of sort of financial sector companies, whose information is it targeting? Is it the bank itself? Is it the bank's customers? Is it market-moving information? Like, what sort of information that is contained within the financial industry do you see foreign state actors interested in accessing?
It's a mixed bag, and it's with everything, right? So it really depends on the intended objective and goal of the actor behind that activity. As I said before, if we're talking about nation-state actors, of course, have a very specific intent, and so it's most of the time is information that would directly benefit, their own nation and their own government economically, or maybe to better position them strategically when talking about, economic, initiatives or political, opportunities and things like that. So sometimes it's that kind of information. Sometimes it's about, clients and things like that. But in general, you can also see, and there have been very public cases where more financially motivated actors have gone after the kind of non-public or non-public information of that kind of confidential information that could be monetized, could be used to move markets potentially, or at least make money if you know how to play it, from an insider trading perspective, for example. So and that is an interesting threat for the sector, because it's a kind of combination of technically skilled people and those that really understand the market strategies, right, and then sort of how the markets work. And it's not often, actually, it's quite rare that it's actually the same people that we're talking about. So most of the time we see a combination of, say, sort of syndicate of technically skilled people who get hired to do that, to actually compromise a target and then sell that access or the information that gets stolen to those who can actually monetize it. And we've seen high-profile cases in the past few years with criminals making millions out of this kind of schemes.
And I just want to amplify a point that Valentina made, which is that, you know, from an intelligence perspective, the real challenge for us is that reconnaissance activity that's conducted for the purposes of espionage, so stealing the information, or for the purposes of preparing and mapping out a network to conduct a destructive attack, it all looks the same in those early stages. So the real value of the type of, you know, sometimes foreign intelligence that other intelligence agencies can collect is to try to give us a clue of what the intent is for the actor who's in a critical infrastructure network. So that's why it's very important that we talk about kind of both sides of this spectrum. So the importance of a private sector company or a state or a hospital or whomever reporting to the FBI when they see suspicious activity, so we can see what the indicators are. We can use our technically trained agents to kind of look at the network and see what's happening with the permission of the victim, then share that with the intelligence community and try to do an assessment of, is there anything else we have that tells us why, you know, this actor might be in this network. And that goes a long way to then informing back to the victim and to other potential victims of what to do and what to be on the lookout for.
So I spent a lot of time as a prosecutor working in the national security space, and one of the things that I saw and that the intelligence community I felt was frequently confronted with is that when you identify that there is espionage going on, that a foreign state actor is in this network or using this communication tool or the like, it is actually valuable that you know that, because then you continue to watch and monitor and see what they're doing in order to answer the ultimate questions that are of paramount importance. But in order to keep watching, you have to not let them know that you're onto them, and you sort of have to let the activity continue to an extent. How is the FBI balancing that issue when it comes to intrusions into critical infrastructure, private networks, et cetera?
Yeah, so you can understand a company or an organization that's the victim of that type of activity just wants to get them out, as quickly as possible. And sometimes that's the right answer, but you're right that the more intelligence we can collect, and also not just passively collecting, but there are opportunities operationally when you can see an adversary actually, in the midst of doing something. There are things with our intelligence authorities that we can do here domestically. There are operations we can help enable with agencies that operate overseas that can really help. But that's not necessarily a compelling argument when it's your company or your hospital that's has this weird activity going on in your networks, and there's a risk assessment you have to make with that. The thing that we try to dispel is that there's often a sense that it's an either-or choice, that you either need to stop the activity immediately or you need to let an agency like the FBI see how it plays out. You can actually do both simultaneously, and that's where we're able to partner between the FBI and DHS. We are often notifying victims together and responding together, with DHS having more of that mission of helping to mitigate the activity, but without getting into too much detail, I will just say there are ways to do that and lower the risk to the organization while also allowing the FBI to kind of do its thing and see what additional intelligence we can collect.
Secretary Wei, have you experienced this at all, being on the side that is maybe more likely to be the victim of these sort of intrusions and attacks when it comes to the state systems, and how have you balanced that issue?
Okay, I can say, thankfully not. We have not. And, again, we get briefed as secretaries of all of the potential foreign threats and the like that can occur. But again, we're at a space in New Jersey where we've been very much laser focused, such as other secretaries nationally, in being preventative, and also, and I hate to continue to say this, but to just ensure that there are coordination throughout all of the levels of our governing, so that situations such as this will not occur. And we would get alerted, but thankfully not. So moving forward, I'm just going to be hopeful that that still is going to be the case.
So I think we have about 10 minutes left, and I was going to open it up to questions. I think you can see how broad a range of sort of experience and expertise our panel has, and so I'd love to give you the opportunity to sort of pick their brains on whatever is of most interest to you, if anyone does have any questions.
I'm here.
Sorry.
Okay. Well, my name is Laura Koch, Be Women, and my question is for Valentina, and it's about cybersecurity about the private world, because you're talking all about specific things about public issues, but when it deals with the accounts and money, I mean, this can be very serious for the whole of the United States. How is Morgan Stanley dealing with specifically with this issue, and how are you maintaining? Because this is a race that you never end, as you somewhat said there. How do you manage that? I mean, this is so threatening for everybody. Everybody in this room.
I say what keeps me in the job, but anyway, apart from that, so Morgan Stanley is obviously that's the same for every financial sector organizations that we work actually very closely with peers every day, I would say, and actually seeing what other peers are experiencing, the kind of maybe fraudulent activity that they see against their customers. It's actually very useful because it kind of gives us sort of insight into what potentially may come our way. Obviously, different organizations have different attack surfaces, different threats that they face, of course, depending on if you're more of a retail bank, or, an investment bank, and so on. But today, with the variety of, solutions and services and products that we offer our customers, the attack surface obviously expands considerably. And so, it would be idealistic, I would say, to say that we can protect customers against everything and anything. It's not the case. And sometimes, take, not to obviously call anybody out, but even an incident like, the Capital One breach is not necessarily something that it's easy to, predict, if anything, right? And again, it's not necessarily something that you see immediately, a fraudulent, financially motivated attack, but the kind of exposure that incident, an incident like that can, of course, lead to, can expose customers to all sorts of criminal activities further down the line. So sometimes it's not that easy to, answer that question as to say, we have obviously layered defenses that, as any major organizations that are obviously designed to protect our customers, both at the the very end, as far as the left of the bank, as we want to say, as possible. But even when we see activity already on the way, we try, of course, to mitigate the risk, or if anything, the damage to the customers if we're really already seeing fraudulent activity. But there are different ways that our customers can be targeted. Sometimes it's me or you guys, sharing the same password, using the same password for different platforms. You get compromised with one of them, you use them for your banking, online, and that's it. That's an easy way for financially motivated actors to get into your account, and that is not necessarily something that we can do much about, other than just seeing that kind of activity and tell you, do not use the same password for the same, the same accounts, or use multi-factor authentication, two-factor authentication if your organization, if your financial institution, your bank offers that, and 90% of the time today that's the case, unfortunately.
Okay.
And
Sorry.
Thank you again, panelists, for your time today and sharing your own perspectives. My question is more about how do you educate, and do you also collaborate with the private sector, the government, because at the end of the day, defense starts with an educated voter, an educated employee, whether it's in retail or wherever, right? Because if we can detect it, we can raise our hand and say, oops, there's a problem. I suspect there's a problem. So what are you folks doing in terms of collaborating on that? Is that something that's top of the priority, or are you just, pretty much in survival? Like, let's figure out where the reconnaissance and that's.
Right. Maybe I'll ask Tanya to answer that, because I know the FBI has put a lot of effort into the initiative to get more information and share more information with the public.
Yeah, and I think you're exactly right that it touches on Valentina's point as well. We cannot defend against everything, and so an important part of the defense is not only what we can do at the federal and state and local government level, but also having that educated populace to know what to watch out for and how to recognize information that's not legitimate and is meant to influence. There's a couple things that we've been doing at the federal level from the FBI. We have a website, it's a page on the FBI website called Protected Voices. So if you just Google Protected Voices, you'll see it. It has a series of vignettes and videos and information that's meant to educate everyone from the general public to political campaigns and candidates for office on how to secure their activities and what to be on the lookout for. At the kind of higher federal government level, the Director of National Intelligence that I mentioned earlier collaborated with a lot of federal agencies to recently release a new framework that's going to govern how the federal government makes decisions about releasing information to the general public about foreign influence activities. This is a very tricky space because what I think the federal government wants to be especially careful not to do is to inadvertently amplify the message that an actor is trying to put out. As was mentioned earlier, some of the intent behind these efforts is to increase divisions, sow discord, increase misinformation. So the last thing the federal government wants is to kind of play into that. And so what this framework does is lay out kind of a methodology for how the government will make decisions about informing the general public as well as victims when we see this type of activity occurring.
Definitely, yeah. And in terms of IBM, we're business to business, so not necessarily educating the public, but other enterprises. We offer free, mock scenarios. A few of you have been to. We have a cyber range in Boston, and there we'll actually take a company, whether you're in HR or you're in IT or anything. We'll take you through a mock scenario, and we actually have been taking this as a free service to a lot of different state and local governments to educate people, whether anywhere and whoever is interested on kind of what can happen and how to respond to various different types of incidents going on. And actually in LA County, in terms of information sharing and education, LA County teamed up with us to actually provide free threat intelligence to any business that signs up and free email monitoring. So that's kind of a step in the right direction from a county level to educate the business owners who not necessarily, they're not as aware as state or local government in terms of cyber awareness, but they still need to be protected. So kind of making moves on those levels is what we've been teaming up on.
And if I may, again, I just want to put out there that we do have our state mobile app, which of course explains all of the election initiatives and Bill of Rights, polling locations, so that our voters, our people constituents can actually know where exactly they should go and are armed, if you will, in terms of their Bill of Rights. I also want to mention my national organization has a campaign right now, #TrustedInfo2020, in which we're going out there and explaining if any person in their state, any voter, has like a concern or needs further information, who they can contact, and that information is also provided to them.
I think our last question. Go ahead.
Hi there. My name is Amy Larson. I'm an associate at Davis Polk. I'm really delighted to be here, and thank you for your time. I was wondering, for anyone, what kinds of international partnerships might have been really helpful, any collaborations that are really have been effective, either in real time as you're facing specific threats, or in hindsight, where you've been able to learn from a useful international example. Thanks.
Sure, thank you. I'll start. International partnerships are really critical for the FBI from both a law enforcement and an intelligence perspective. When we're dealing with whether it's criminal or nation-state threats, a lot of times some of the most valuable intelligence we're getting is coming from foreign partners, and then as we're looking to undertake a disruption, whether it's to take down a whole criminal enterprise or what have you, there's very little that we do solely just as a single agency. Most of what we do in that space is in concert with other domestic agencies, other foreign agencies. So just for example, a recent kind of global takedown we did of an international kind of fraud scheme that was causing tens of millions of dollars in losses that was cyber related. You had servers located all around the world, internet domains that we had to reroute, people that we had arrested and extradited from foreign countries to the US to stand trial, et cetera. So all of that requires a lot of trust. And really, a lot of times we talk about cyber as this kind of thing up here and ones and zeros and kind of amorphous, but much of the work we do in this space really comes down to long-standing trust relationships. So that's with private sector partners, other state and federal agencies, our international partners. So we really rely on that quite a bit. And from our perspective, we're looking to grow our cyber capabilities internationally. We have the FBI's international presence is our cyber assistant legal attaches, which are in embassies in about a dozen countries. And there's almost, nearly every kind of foreign counterpart that the FBI director meets with, they're coming in, they're talking about all sorts of issues, but they're asking, hey, can we have one of those FBI cyber legal attaches in the embassy here so that we can increase cooperation. So that's certainly an area that we do a lot in, but we're looking to build on.
That's all we have time for. Please join me in thanking our panelists for making the time to be here today. It may well have been a net loss from a cybersecurity perspective to have had them away from their desks for an hour and a half. But